Prologue. The first thing that strikes you about the dead is just how many of them there are. The idea that you hear bandied about that there are more people living now than have ever lived in the past is plain wrong, by a factor of 13. The number of Homo sapiens who have ever lived, fought, loved, fussed, and finally died, over the last 100,000 years is around 90 billion. 90 billion is a big number, especially when you're trying to write a book with the title that implies it covers all of them. But it all depends on how you look at things. 90 billion is big, but also small. You could bury everyone alive who has ever lived side by side in an area the size of England and Scotland combined, or Uruguay, or Oklahoma. That's just 0.1% of the land area of the earth. And if you piled all the dead people who have ever lived on an enormous set of scales, they would be comfortably outweighed by the ants that are out there right now, plotting who knows what. It's all a question of perspective. The dead are, literally, our family, not just the ones we know we are related to, our parents, 4 grandparents, and 8 great-grandparents. Go back 10 generations, and each of us has 1,000 direct relatives. Go back 15, and the number soars to more than 35,000, and that's not counting aunts and uncles. In fact, we need only go back to the year 1250 to have more direct ancestors than the number of human beings who have ever lived. The solution to this apparent paradox is that we're all interrelated. The further you go back, the more ancestors we're likely to share. The earliest common ancestor of everyone living in Europe lived only about 600 years ago, and everyone alive on the planet today is related to both Confucius, 551 to 479 BC, and Nefertiti, 1370 to 1330 BC. So this is a book of family history for everybody. Trying to organize relatives is always a challenge. The great film director, Billy Wilder, once pointed out that an actor entering through a door gives the audience nothing. But if he enters through a window, you've got a situation. With this in mind, we've avoided the usual approach of organizing the family get-together into professional groupings, scientists, kings, business people, murderers, etc. This is a perfectly reasonable system, except that, families being what they are, the actors and musicians will be tempted to flounce past the table labeled accountants or psychologists and vice versa. So we've just started from a different premise, selecting themes that focus on quality of life rather than their content. Qualities that are familiar to everybody: our relationship to our parents, our state of health, our sexual appetites, our attitude to work, our sense of what it all means. We also draw no distinction between people with universally familiar names and those who are virtually unheard of. The only criteria for inclusion is interestingness. The results are unexpected bedfellows, Sir Isaac Newton duetting with Salvador Dali, for example, or Karl Marx singing bass to Emma Hamilton's soprano. In E.M. Foster's novel, A Room with a View, Mr. Emerson remarks that getting through life is like a public performance on the violin, in which you must learn the instrument as you go along. The major attraction of the dead is that the violin has been put back in its case, and their lives, however short, discordant, or tuneless, have a definite beginning, middle, and end. That is their chief advantage over those of us who are still trying to spot the tunes on our own swirling cacophony. We can see or hear more clearly how one thing leads to another. The original Egyptian and Tibetan books of the dead were kind of early self-help manuals, practical guides to getting the best out of an afterlife. Anyone hoping for the same in the pages that follow will be disappointed, as will those looking forward to 90 billion entries in the index. This is a book that is more interested in questions than answers, and in tapping into our interesting connections rather than building a closed system of classification. Above all, There's nothing like hanging out with the dead to point up the sheer improbability of being alive. As the emphatically not dead American writer Maya Angelou reminds us, life loves to be taken by the lapel and told, "I'm with you, kid, let's go."